What is it going to take for us to get peace?
First people in, it was the cowboys, the cowboy gang.
I have a book called The Good Old Days. They really weren't. You know, I mean, like I said, if you wanted to go back in time and live like that, it's romantic. You know, it's a great thought. But you really wouldn't want to live like that at all.
They had their loot. They had their rifles, everything with them.
10 years before Tombstone, they grazed this land, run cattle, and stealing cattle out of Mexico, because we're close to the border, was normal.
Commonplace.
And well, that's what we did. That's what they did. They stole back and forth, killed each other.
Now the Apache has been fighting these guys for 7 years straight. The Cavalry's getting tired. They've been fighting the Apache for 7 years straight. Nobody's getting anywhere. A lot of people are losing people on both sides. There's never going to be an end to this.
This was free land. As long as you can capture and hold, free grazing land. 1865.
And Cochise let him know what he wanted. He just wanted to be left alone. He was a wise man. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to see his people dying, his women and children being massacred. He did not want this. Who would? I would.
When a rush starts or a boom starts, that's exactly what it is. That's why they call it a rush. Because all of a sudden a strike happens and people come in like from everywhere all at once. So it's a calamity. It's a rush for sanity. It's a rush for law. It's a rush for everything.
It was open country. But you had to fight the bandits, the Apache, the outlaws.
Now what do you want again, sir? I told you you're not taking our guns, senor. Well, your decision.
It was a tough way to make a living. There's a lot more to Tombstone other than just, bang, bang, shoot them up. 300 miles of underground workings beneath these hills. That's the reason the town's here.
So we're here in the Grand Central Mine, the largest, deepest mine in the Tombstone mining district.
Yeah, Tombstone's a mining town. It wasn't just a place where cowboys came to get drunk and shoot at each other. It was a mining town, and the mining industry spawned a lot of other industries.
Ed Shufflin for many years, like many other prospectors, scoured these lands.
We came out here a couple of years earlier and saw that the place had promise. He then, when he wanted to prospect, he engaged the Cavalry out of Fort Huachuca, and when they escorted him out here, that's when the famous statement came that this is where he was going to find his fortune, and they said, all you're going to find out here is your own tombstone. And that's where he got the inspiration for his first mining claim and the name for the town. Until then, it was Goose Flats.
Yeah, that's where the Grand Central came from. They were Boyer and Williams were the second prospectors on the scene here. They weren't even prospectors. They were just looking for some likely land to stake out a ranch.
Yeah. Gotta be somewhere for this walk somewhere. Well, that's one thirsty animal. Gotta be.
When he discovered the silver, and he was escorted because it was Chiricahua Apache land. Everybody needed an escort then. It was Geronimo would be on the warpath till 1886. So when he found his silver, like you said, he went around having it assayed, and it never proved all that rich until he went back up north with his brother, and they went to a geologist up there and said that it was very promising. It was very high grade. And that's where he engaged Richard Gerd, and they got the backing of former Governor Safford. In that year, 1877, when he found the silver, and it was a protrusion, the population went to 5,100 in 1 year.
Many of these mines had copper, rich mineralization that flowed throughout the rocks of the earth. Were close to the surface. And many of these prospectors needed no more than a pickaxe, basic hand tools. Richard Gerd and Shefflin came from Camp Signal at the McCracken mine and ventured down this way in the cloak of night and secrecy with all the supplies they felt they needed to get away and get down here and find their riches. But word got out and many men followed.
Good flow through here. I'm pretty sure Bonnie came this way.
Upon Shefflin's return from Tucson with supplies, he learns of Gerd's dealings by offering.
But Gerd persuaded them to stay, and he's like, yeah, man, we'll form a partnership. Anything you find, I'll assay it for you. Any likely ground you find, stake out half of it for yourself, half of it for us, and everybody will be happy. They were back on the deal.
This was the same case with the Grand Central mine. Oliver Boyer, Ed Williams, had discovered this mine, and it was to Gerd's surprise, as well as Shefflin brothers, that it was a big one. As you can see, it's been since open pitted and milked for all it's worth many years later in the 1900s.
Here's about all we have left to drink until we're out of water ourselves. They weren't charging an arm and leg up there at Gougi. We'd have another barrel of water just to ourselves and the mules. You know?
You see that right there?
What's that?
Jack, you see that?
What's that?
Looks like Bonnie was dragging that chain right here.
That looks just like a chain was drug.
Yeah, right there.
I bet she came down through this wash here and on up through Goose Flats. I think up there, that's where old Shefflin and Gerd are at.
So that's the contention ended up being one of the second or third biggest producers. It was just the partnership who went on to form Tombstone Mill and Mining Company. They screwed up. They sold the contention for 10 grand to raise capital to get the business going. They should have hung on to the contention, but the Boyers, with Oliver Boyer and Dick Gerd, they knew each other back in the day, because that's pretty much what started it all. And then of course, Williams Well, mining was an extremely manual, labor-intensive trade to be in. Once miners were underground, they had to do everything by hand. The only machinery they had at the surface was a steam-powered hoist. Machinery similar to this. Once you were underground, you had to do everything manually. You had to drill the holes by hand using hammers and sets of drill steels for the dynamite. After they blasted, they had to move the rock by hand. They had to muck the rock by hand. They even had to push the ore carts by hand, or the wheelbarrows, whichever they were using. And not only were they underground working in sometimes in incredibly tight and airless conditions, performing amazing feats of manual physical labor, they're doing it in the dark. Back in the 19th century, the only lighting they had underground were candles. So it's hard work in the dark, back-breaking hard work in the dark. There were plenty of hazards. There was always the danger of collapse, not so much in Tombstone. This area is mainly good ground. The mines here are self-supporting for the most part, good, solid, hard limestone. In some places, though, the mines had to be supported with, every square foot had to be supported with some kind of shoring, timbers, and a lot of times mining companies that were well financed, they would skimp on the amount of timbering that they were supposed to use in cases where they had bad ground and there would be collapses. It was a very dangerous way to make a living. Here in Tombstone, there weren't quite so many deaths as there were in other places. It's not like coal mining where you've got methane gas or coal dust and the whole place can blow up on you. This is hard rock mining, going after silver. There aren't explosive gases underground, so at least they had that going for them. But still, it was a tough way to make a living. But they were paid well. Miners made $4 a day back then. So they did pretty well for themselves. And they spent their money freely, which is why Tombstone was such a wild place. You had 800 miners running around, spending their money, drinking, gambling, going to the red light district. There were a lot of sharks. There were a lot of con men. There were a lot of card cheats out there. So yeah, it was a real rough town. It was a rough town because the miners made so much money, and they earned that money. Believe me, there were too many people today who would be willing to work the way they did back in that day. It was a tough way to make a living.
After the discovery of the Grand Central Mine in late March of 1878, Oliver Boyer, Thomas Walker teamed up back with Ed Shefflin and Richard Gerd and made true on their agreement that they would split part of their mine, and Richard Gerd agreed to do the assaying as promised. Shefflin, not too happy about this, called his end of the mine and his section contention. These mines went on to become the biggest producers in the region, which once word got out, men and women from all walks of life from around the world came here seeking fortune, a new life, and adventure.
Something like East Virginia blues.
By the late summer, fall, and into the winter, an influx of hundreds of miners and small mining camps and tents began to pop up around the region near these mines. By spring 1880, a town was being built, thriving on the new money and the riches that lie here. Saloons were built, bankers, lawyers, hostlers, ranchers, and eventually miners came to this region and built a new life. It was the largest silver mining camp in the Arizona Territory and would rival most mining camps anywhere this side of the Mississippi. Many Wild West stories were born and died here, as well as some of the men that were working the mines. It was very hard work. They had worked 24 hours a day around the clock.
But still, it was a tough way to make a living. But they were paid well. Miners made $4 a day back then. So they did pretty well for themselves. And they spent their money freely, which is why Tombstone was such a wild place. You had 800 miners running around, spending their money, drinking, gambling, going to the red light district.
In the 1880s, it flourished with miners and prospectors, bankers, hustlers, saloonists, and businessmen and women of all types from all over the world, which came here in the Wild West Arizona Territory.
It was a tough way to make a living.
Spring of 1878, in February, Richard Gerd was working the McCracken mine, several hundred miles to the north. Shefflin was known very well in these parts, a well-respected miner, prospector, and had a lucky eye for spotting these type of minerals. A lot of men in the area knew this. Gerd was a well-known engineer and assayer, and though he tried his hand at prospecting, was very unsuccessful. $25,000 in debt, and with $16 in his pocket, teamed up with the Shefflin brothers in this very region, and they decided to go for it all. Camping out in the spring of '78, in February, they lit out for this area and didn't want anyone else to know where they were going. They had their fortunes at the Lucky Cuss and the Tough Nut, several other mines, before this was even built. It was shortly thereafter other men of the region, Thomas Walker and Oliver Boyer, better known as Jack Friday, met Shefflin and Gerd at a spring. At that point, Shefflin realized there was other men on the way, and it wouldn't be long. Many men came from all over the world. But at that time, there was just a few men here in several miners' camps.
I really thought we had that burrow tied up well last night. Bet they were out there looking for water.
Gotta be looking for water.
Shit, we're out of water ourselves out here.
I don't know what we're gonna do if we can't find her.
Well, if they were charging an arm and leg up there at Globe and Gouge, we'd have our own water. If this about all we got is here, front gut.
For now.
Ed Shefflin wasn't too happy about this. And on a run to Tucson for supplies, it was then Ed Williams and Oliver Boyer discovered the Grand Central Mine. Story has it their burros had escaped and they were on a search to find water. They had followed these burros, and the harness of metal that drug through the dirt uncovered a significant ore silver lode that was able to see from the surface. They realized that at that point they had a large claim upon their hands.
See that, Jack? You see that chain right there? You see the mark? Looks like it's on the trail right here.
It's like Bonnie's been dragging the chain. I think we're onto something. We should just follow this wash on up here to Goose Flats.
Reluctantly, they ended up having to tell Gerd of what they found, because they did have an agreement.
Deal with Dick Gerd. They would, in return for him assaying anything that they found, they were supposed to give Gerd and the Shefflin brothers half of each claim. So if they found some likely ground, they would stake two claims, one for themselves and leave room for the partnership to stake a claim. Well, they didn't. When they found the Grand Central, they staked all the likely ground as their claim. They didn't cut the other guys in on half of what they were supposed to. So they got in a big argument over that. And Gerd finally said, screw you. He went up there and kicked over the claim markers and located two separate claims, the Grand Central for them and the contention claim for Shefflin and Gerd.
Gerd did agree to do the assaying for them, and upon Shefflin's return, he was pretty upset about that. Being the Grand Central was one of the largest producers, he had stood to make a lot of money. Though he already had several mines in the region, the Grand Central was by far the greatest and the largest. Though Shefflin wasn't too happy with Gerd for his agreements with the new men that were coming into the region, that he'd do their assaying for them if they gave him a cut of the mine, the agreement was already made, and Gerd and the Shefflin brothers had learned of the Grand Central's massive quantities of ore. Ore values assaying of up to $2,000 a ton. They were convinced they'd struck it rich. Once Gerd and Boyer and Williams' agreement was made true, they followed through with their word. In discovering the Grand Central, they offered Gerd and Shefflin their cut as promised. Shefflin, not being too happy about this, received the end of the mine, about 50 to 100 feet at the end of the Grand Central, and with his disgust, he named his mine Contention. And from there, the miner camps grew more and more so through 1878, and by fall, several engineers had noted there were several hundred men in the region and a few miners' camps, breaking off into the Gerd camp, Shefflin's camp, and more people flooded in from around the world to build what is known today as Tombstone, which didn't thrive till the midsummer or late fall of 1880. Several years after these early mines were once discovered, Tombstone became an outrageous mining town. Long after the gold rush of the 1850s and 60s of California, Tombstone was a little bit different. The silver brought moral lawlessness, and a lot of men of ill repute, as well as women. Many escaped with their lives, and many died here in these very mines. Many died out in those mountains fighting the Apache at Council Rock. Ed Shefflin and Gerd were a fortunate pair. Ed Shefflin had already discovered many mines. They had both had their chance at prospecting for years with little to no success and nearly gave up or lost their lives to Apache.
Started back in the 1870's with the Apache Wars, fighting the soldiers, the military, the cavalry that was out here. And this is the area where we're at right now is Council Rock. This is Apache territory run by Cochise. 60 miles to the east is the Chiricahuas. The Chiricahuas was run by Geronimo. Geronimo was a little younger, a lot more hard-headed. He didn't want to try to get along with the white man. Cochise on the other side saw that he had no choice but to surrender because the white man just kept coming and coming and coming. No matter how many they killed, they just kept coming and coming and coming. So they decided to, Cochise decided to meet with the military general to sign a treaty, peace, so that the white man could travel through these areas and do their mining and go from east coast to west coast through here and into Mexico. Cochise surrendered back when he signed the contract, but he was still a free man. He was still able to roam around this area and stay here. Geronimo didn't want anything to do with the military, but to kill him. So he threw raids, little private raids onto the soldiers, and the Buffalo soldiers would run through here also back in the day. And they're not spoken of too much, but they did a lot against the Apache. The Apache kind of feared them because of their dark skin color. And Cochise ended up dying here in these mountains that we're standing at now, and he's buried here. But where he was buried, nobody knows. There's not a man alive today that can say that they know where he's buried. There's no pictures of Cochise. He's never taken a picture of him. So all you have is drawings of Cochise or people think he might have looked like. And when they buried him, they trampled their horses all over the burial ground to make it look like it was nothing, so nobody could ever find it. And Cochise ended up going down towards Oklahoma way, I guess, up that way. And they ended up running him down and killed him, and they buried him down there. And to this day, the Apache Nation has been trying to get his body brought down here. But it's my personal opinion that nothing of Geronimo is left. I don't even think they gave him a burial. They probably left him out there for the coyotes and the animals to eat because they did not like him. They hated him. He was one man who was truly hated.
There was no being safe. It was a matter of hide and seek. If the Apache is a very cunning hunter and warrior, one time he played dead. The Apache is relentless, and they did not like the whites, and they did not want them here. Hell, they hid out of the stronghold. The entire United States Army couldn't get them. They never got him. I mean, it was years. Years. They never got him. He surrendered because his tribe was starving. That was the only reason he ever gave in. Yeah, well, he used to sell buttons off his jacket when he got sent to Florida to be in prison. Every train stop, he'd sell buttons off his jacket, and when he ran out of those, he'd get buttons off your jacket and sell those. It's a very enterprising young man. And I don't like those t-shirts or posters that say the original Homeland Security, because it didn't work too well. Cut.
Okay, we're going to go back in time a little bit, back to the 1870s, where the West was wild and there was truly Indian against man. I say white man, because this is where we're standing. This is where the Apache roamed. This was his land. This was his territory. They owned it. They did not believe that anybody else had any rights to be on their property or stealing animals or doing what they had to do. We have two sets of Apaches down here. The Chiricahuas, 60 miles to the east. And right here where we're standing, we're the Cochise Apaches. Okay, today we're standing here next to the base of Apache stronghold, Cochise's stronghold. The reason they call it the stronghold is because he held off the military for 7 years. The cavalry could not touch the Apache back in the day, not in this area where we're at. And the Apaches knew this. The Apaches knew that this area was protected all around, all sides. There's only one way in and one way out. And it's a rugged terrain. And for the cavalry to come up, and they have to leave their animals down the hill and climb up with all their equipment, by the time they got up here ready to fight, they were wore out. And by this time, the Apache they were mean warriors at the time, because they had all their property taken from their land, their animals, everything. They had been pushed around by the white soldiers for so long already. And by this time, they had acquired rifles from the white man who was ready to trade with them. And there was a lot of white men ready to trade with the Apaches, and the Apaches loved these guys to come up. They knew who they were, they'd meet them, and they'd trade. They'd get guns, ammunition, rifles. So at the end of the 1870s, the Apache was fully equipped to fight, but not out in the open. They had to be in their stronghold. Now, an Apache warrior could run from the bottom to the top and be ready to fight. Your cavalry soldier is not going to even make it a quarter of the way up, and he's done. They're tired. But the Apache warrior, they were mean when they went to war. They'd scalp you, they'd cut your heart out, they'd do whatever they had to do to get the power that you had in you to go into them. This was their belief. A lot of stories you hear just tell you a little bit of the truth, because nobody wants the Apache to be the good guy. Everybody wanted the Apache to be the bad guy. The Apache was the good guy until the cavalry turned them to an evil type of people. But they had to do it to survive. And to survive, they had to kill. And on both sides, women and children were killed, both sides. Was the Apache that mean? Or was the white man that mean? I say the white man was that mean because he started killing and raiding the Apaches in their little hideouts where they were at, killing women and children. So in turn, the Apache returned the favor and did the same. People were coming over from the east, going to the west. The Apache would raid the wagons, and they would take what they could from them, because that's all they had left. The cavalry had taken everything good from them, so the only way they could get stuff was to steal it from the white travelers that were coming through. And the cavalry tried to protect a lot of those travelers coming through, but the Apache was too smart, too strong. They were hardcore people. They were unbelievable people. You know, with their beliefs, they would die for it. And you can't say that about many people today.
Geronimo ended up surrendering. and they didn't catch him. There was only at the time, I think, like 18 guys, 18 warriors. They still couldn't get him.
Okay, today we're here at the entrance to the Apache stronghold, Cochise stronghold. And you can see the rugged mountains and rocks were a big benefit to the Apache. They grew up in these rocks. They were raised here. They knew each rock from another. Where we look at it, they all look the same. But the Apache, they were a lot smarter than what we gave them credit for. They held off the cavalry for 7 years. The cavalry tried to get to them for 7 years, and they never could because of the rugged terrain here. The terrain would not allow the military to take their horses up and bring supplies up and keep them. And they had the advantage from the high ground. The Apache was a smart warrior. You know, they would come down at night and do raids at nighttime. A lot of history tells you that the Indians would not fight at night. They fought any time of day. It didn't matter. As long as they did their prayer dance and everything that they had to do, they were ready anytime. And many soldiers died in these rocks. And that's why the government was so willing to make the agreement, the treaty with Cochise, because they could not take him out. He had to agree to what the military had to agree with what Cochise wanted, and all he wanted was to be left alone. And he would let the settlers come through, and he wouldn't bother the settlers, because the Apache Indians got a lot of guns. They had a lot of rifles that they got from traders, crooked traders who wanted just to get greedy for money, and guns were easy to get for them. The Apache did not get the high dollar brand new revolvers and the high dollar guns that the military had, but they had guns. And from the high distance up above, they could keep them off. If you go up to the top of these mountains here and you look down, you can see for miles and miles away who's coming before they even get there. By the time they get there, they arrived here, the Apache was ready for them. They were set up. And you think after 7 years the government would have gave up? Well, they did. That's why they signed the treaty. They signed the treaty with Cochise. So this stronghold is truly a stronghold. It's not just a pile of rocks. This is where people lived. They survived here. They lived here. This was their land. And you wonder what kind of people could live in a land just full of stuff like this, but they did, because they were strong warriors. If you were to go down to the bottom of the base right here where we just climbed up, and you climb up here as fast as you can, you'd be out of breath. The Apache, they could do it all day long. All day long they could run up and down these hills. And when you had the cavalry come up and going up and down these rocks, by the time they got up to shoot a bullet, they were done. They were ready to go back. They needed a break. The white man was weak. The Indians were strong and brave. But there was too many of them. Too many white men came. And they destroyed everything. A lot of culture. They demanded that the Indians, live under their rule, their God, their laws. And in the end, you can see where we're at. It's good. It's starting to turn full circle, though, because today the Indians have casinos. Okay. So they sent a messenger up to set up a meeting with Cochise, and that meeting is set up at Council Rock, which is on the other side of this mountain here. And Council Rock was a place where they met with the general. They sat down and they talked. So they came to an agreement. And it was a good agreement. He got to live his life out in these mountains here, which are called the Dragoons. These are the Dragoon Mountains. And he is buried here somewhere. He could be buried right here where we're at. We don't know. But he was buried, and all the horses came around. They trampled all over the ground so that you couldn't tell where he was buried at. Nobody knows. You might be walking over his burial site anytime you're walking up here in the Dragoons. And Geronimo stayed a renegade for a few more years, running around doing raids on ranches around, raiding the military. Because he was an unhappy guy because of the way he was treated from a little kid on the way up. He was always pushed around by the white man, and he wasn't going to let it happen anymore. But they ended up killing him. They found him, and he's dead. We know that today. And he was buried up by Oklahoma somewhere. And we're still trying to, Apache Nation is still trying to get his body, his remains back down here so they can bury him in the Chiricahuas, where that was his territory. It is my belief, I should say, that there are no remains. This man was well hated. He was the most hated Apache, in the Southwest. The government did not like him. They hated him. And I believe that he was just left out to die and left his bones out for the animals to tear up and drag around and eat, the vultures to eat on him. And there are no remains because the Apache Nation cannot get the government today to release his remains. Why wouldn't they want to release his remains? What's the big deal about it? Because they don't have them. That's my belief. Okay.
the street. 30 seconds. They asked Wyatt Earp how long did it take, and he says, I don't know, I didn't have a stopwatch. 30 seconds, almost 40 rounds of ammunition spent, 3 dead and 3 wounded. Tom and Frank McClory, Bill and Ike Clanton, and Billy Claiborne would face off against 3 Earp brothers and Doc Holliday. Some say the Earps set out to murder them, plain and simple. Excuse me. Some say the McClorys and Clanton weren't even armed, but that's impossible, or else 3 of the Earp faction would have gotten wounded. They didn't shoot themselves. Billy Claiborne and Ike Clanton would run from that fight. They would forever be known for that. Billy Claiborne would leave town under a cloud of shame. He came back within a couple months and wanted to be called Billy the Kid Claiborne, after his idol, the real Billy the Kid, William Bonney. He was a friend of Johnny Ringo's. They were a member of the same faction, the Democrats. No political statement. Johnny Ringo was killed by Buckskin Frank Leslie. You may not have heard of him either, but he was the most dangerous man to ever walk these streets. He was so mean. Well, he killed 11 men in 11 months. It said when he was walking down the boardwalk, he just better get on the other side of the street. He's a member of the Earp faction, brought in to help back up the Earps. He's a former cavalry scout, a gambler, bartender. One time he set his wife up against the wall in his house and shot her entire silhouette with a .45 and made her stand there while he reloaded 3 times. It ended in divorce. Frank is mean, downright mean. He's a nasty man. Don't cross him. He shot Johnny Ringo. Johnny Ringo was a friend of Billy Claiborne's, and Frank doesn't like cowards. So you see where I'm going with this one. They are of the Earp faction, the Republicans. I'm not making a political statement. They're going to send in Charlie Storms, the opposite faction, to upset the games. We'll see how this works out for Charlie. Put it this way, Charlie. The longer he takes the deal, the longer you get to hold on to your money. Imagine that. Well,
think I need both legs.
Where you say they're back, you tell him?
I think you have the worst poker face I've ever seen in my life.
Poker face.
That and asking for one dilemma.
Everybody has to have a poker face.
Come on,
Well, you
show
might
us what
want
you're
to
so proud of.
There's no mind about it this time. What are you laughing at? Just ante up.
Have you ever thought of stretching out your state to where
You ever thought about minding your own business?
Decent
Some advice?
I'll deal with you, Charlie. Let's get this over with.
I told him I don't need it.
You've been called.
One hand.
Yeah, full house.
Yeah, is that all? Hold it.
What?
No. Generally, a full house isn't a bad hand at all.
Full house is very nice and
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't beat a straight flush.
straight flush.
Nothing but a shit hands off that iron, boy.
How you gonna pull something like that without taking another card?
Calm down.
I am not gonna calm down. You're nothing but a cheat. You know. Get your hands off me.
I insist that you lead our Steve Jackson's door.
Uncock that.
You're supposed to be my friend, Pat.
That's why you're still alive. Now put that away.
This ain't over. You hear me?
Oh, it's over.
This ain't over, Luke.
Have a nice evening, Charles.
You got a product.
Always an idiot.
You're gonna get somebody killed.
Yeah, but it won't be me.
You're not making many friends in Tombstone.
Oh, sure I am. Look at them all. Oh, come on, man. You're reading too much into that nonsense now. You know that boy can't play.
Well, that's true.
Let's just have another drink. You know, as a matter of fact, it may just behoove him to find himself some other means of entertainment. Because this one isn't quite working out too well for him.
What do you want me to do? Take up knitting?
Now, there is a good safe hobby for that. That you sure picked the damnest friends.
Yeah, you're one of them.
Huh. What a waste. Nothing Marshall.
It appears that Charlie underestimated Luke. Luke's nickname was the Undertaker's friend. He never killed somebody by shooting him where it showed. Made it easier to bury him. He got off on self-defense, and he and Matt would leave town to go to Dodge City shortly thereafter. He invested in a little place you may have heard of called the Long Branch Saloon. He then traveled south to Texas and in Fort Worth opened the most successful gambling operation of its time called the White Elephant. And when he died, they went through his papers and found that he wasn't just a killer and a gambler. He gave away tens of thousands of dollars to churches wherever he went. And I already told you the difference in the monetary, between then and now. And he was an atheist. No cowboy or gambler down on his luck ever left Luke's company empty-handed. He was a very generous man. He died of dropsy. Now we call that congestive heart disease. Charlie, however, and what scared people about Luke is two of those shots were in the same hole, directly in the heart. He was dead before he ever hit the floor. And then he went back in and just started dealing cards like nothing ever happened. Charlie here, like I said, moved in permanently to a little place down the street we call Blue Hill.
Cochise College, trial, belly dancer, give a big hand.